It is Friday. It's the first day of August. I'm Moon Gon-young. This is ARIRANG News live from Seoul. Our top stories today. Korean exporters are on alert as Chinese manufacturers flex their muscles in sectors that are Korea's traditional strongholds. Now this highlighted by a plunge in Korean exports to China. International health experts are preparing to surge into West Africa to fight a raging outbreak of the Ebola virus. Now, this at the death toll there in West Africa tops 729. It's not just hot, it's sweltering hot here in Korea. Well, the nation's weather agency issues its first excessive heat warning for the nation's capital this year. How to bear the unbearable heat, we'll tell you how. But first, let us begin with the economy. Now, Korea has enjoyed export success in a number of sectors, ranging from smartphones and steel to petrochemicals. But Chinese companies are now flooding the market with cheaper products, forcing Korean enterprises to branch out to other sectors. First, our Kim Ji-yeon reports on China's growing dominance.
China is increasingly taking bigger bites out of Korea's pie. Chinese smartphone makers are starting to encroach on Samsung Electronics' territory. Although Samsung remained #1 in global market share in the first half of the year at 23%, China's Xiaomi was a close second at 21%. The Chinese smartphone makers are gaining ground as their skills catch up with their attractive pricing. It's a similar story for Korea's petrochemical and steel companies. The operating profits of Korea-based steelmaker Posco in the second quarter stood at $547.6 million, down from $681 million on year. At the same time, the rate of steel imports used in the domestic market has sharply increased. The proportion of steel imports stood at 40% from January to May this year, up more than 11 percentage points compared to the same period last year. More than half of those imports came from China.
The business life cycle, when looking at the Korean steel industry, is in its maturing stages. It will be difficult to compete with competitors from China in terms of price competitiveness. Korean industries need to seek out new fields in order to survive in the global market.
An official from the Korea Trade Investment and Promotion Agency told the Seoul-based Joseon Daily that the country needs to expand the types of goods it exports and should shift more of its focus toward consumer goods such as health and beauty products and the service sector. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Well, despite the threats out of China, Korea's trade balance stayed in the black for the 30th month in July. The Trade Ministry says exports rose 5.7% on year last month to $48 billion, while imports gained 5.8% to $46 billion. Well, compared to July last year, exports of wireless mobile devices saw the biggest increase at 25%, while exports of ships went the other direction, dropping 14%. The shipbuilding industry was hit due to an 80% drop in orders from China. The Trade Ministry says related ministry officials will meet soon to discuss the slump in exports to China, which is the largest importer of Korean goods. Meanwhile, Korea's consumer prices gained at the slowest rate in 3 months in July, as the prices of those vegetables and livestock stayed relatively stable. Statistics Korea says that the country's consumer price index rose 1.6% last month from a year earlier, which is slower than the 1.7% gain the previous month. The agency attributes the low but stable price increase to lack of severe weather conditions such as typhoons or heavy rainfall, which has led to some bumper harvests. Core inflation, which excludes things like oil and food prices, rose 2.2% on year last month. Finance Ministry officials expect the prices to remain stable for the time being at least. Now, shifting our focus, with the by-elections behind them, Korea's semi-new look National Assembly is turning its focus to a number of bills designed to energize the lackluster economy and, of course, improve the people's livelihoods. And adding to these bills, at the top of the agenda, in fact, is a key piece of legislation designed to uncover the exact cause of April's ferry disaster. Here's our Kim Ji-yeon.
More than 7,000 bills await parliamentary review, but none are perhaps as urgent as the one that is aimed at uncovering the causes of April's ferry disaster. The rival parties continue to spar over the details of the so-called Seoul ferry bill, which proposes creating a panel of inquiry to look into the tragedy. But Saenuri Party lawmakers remain opposed to giving the panel prosecutorial powers. Other bills on the table include one that would subject civil servants and their relatives to criminal penalties if they accept more than 1 million won, around $8,000 from a third party, regardless of whether it was intended as a bribe. The scope of the measures are under dispute by the parties who can't agree on whether they should extend to siblings, spouses, or even cousins of civil servants. And with President Park Geun-hye urging all-out efforts to boost the economy, lawmakers are under pressure to pass a stack of economic bills. They range from the introduction of tax schemes that encourage companies to pay higher wages, and easing mortgage rules that limit loans for home buyers, to support for companies that transition temporary employees into permanent positions. The ruling Saenuri Party's victory in this week's by-election raised its number of seats to 158 in the 300-member National Assembly. That means the governing party can now push bills through the parliament unilaterally without the cooperation of the main opposition party. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
A group of defense experts is advising the U.S. government to work closely with China to prepare for a worst-case scenario in North Korea. What they also suggest is that Washington send more troops to South Korea to keep an unpredictable North Korea in check. Our Kim Ji-yeon explains.
American defense experts say the U.S. government needs to closely communicate with Chinese leaders in order to prepare for a state of emergency in North Korea. A report by the U.S. National Defense Panel led by former Defense Secretary William Perry and retired Army General John Abizad says the most probable emergency scenarios would be the breakout of a war or regime collapse. The independent panel assesses the Pentagon's quadrennial defense review. The report added there was an increased need to dispatch U.S. troops to South Korea amid heightened tensions on the peninsula. It added that the stationing of smart weapons was also urgent in order to ease nuclear tensions and reduce civilian deaths in case of war. Citing the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the report said North Korea is concentrating on the development of nuclear weapons and missiles because it lacks conventional military strength, adding that plans are needed to secure the North's nuclear weapons in case they fall into the hands of terrorists. The panel also said North's precise guided missiles and per-cyber community makes it difficult for U.S. defense planners to come up with plans in how to deal with an emergency situation out of Pyongyang. The panel report added the defense review fails to fully address growing national security threats, including nuclear proliferation by North Korea and Iran, the insurgency in Iraq, and the crisis in Ukraine. The chairman of the House Committee on Armed Services, Howard McKeown, said the U.S. military is facing a high risk, adding that a strong military underwrites all other tools the U.S. has for global influence. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
The U.S. is once again calling on North Korea to release Kenneth Bae, the U.S. missionary who has been detained in the North for more than 18 months now. Deputy State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf says that the U.S. is very concerned about his health and urged Pyongyang to grant him special amnesty and immediate release on humanitarian grounds. Now, her comments come after Mr. Bae told a pro-North Korea newspaper based in Japan this week that he felt abandoned by the U.S. government. Responding to Mr. Bae's plea, his family demanded the U.S. government do whatever it takes to bring him home. Kenneth Bae, who is suffering a number of serious health issues, was arrested in November 2012, convicted of unspecified anti-state crimes, and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor last year.
All of the day's important events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-yong live from Seoul.
Global shopping market. For the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia. Health officials worldwide are watching the deadliest Ebola outbreak in West Africa very closely. Now, many are concerned that it's really getting out of control and could spread around the globe. That's a scenario that officials are working very hard to avoid. And the WHO is preparing a $100 million plan to contain this deadly virus, which has already killed more than 700 people since breaking out earlier this year. Here's our Connelly.
Health authorities in West Africa are struggling to contain a deadly Ebola outbreak.
To look over this fence right behind you now and look at the patients, and you know that their chances are very small, and it's horrible.
More than 700 people, including dozens of health workers, have died so far from this year's outbreak, and there are currently more than 1,300 others who are confirmed to have the virus. Sierra Leone, one of the hardest hit countries, is currently in a state of emergency, and health officials have begun to quarantine certain areas. The rapid spread of the virus is putting a strain on the nation.
Already we had a very inadequate health workforce, and we don't have enough specialists in country as far as medical doctors and even specialist nurses are concerned.
That concern has spread throughout the world. The World Health Organization said Thursday that it is launching a $100 million response plan to combat Ebola in West Africa.
The plan includes, identifies a whole range of medical personnel required to help support the response to the outbreak.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has advised Americans to avoid non-essential travel to Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. There is no cure or vaccine for Ebola. The fatality rate of the current outbreak stands at about 60%. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
Now, Israel and Hamas has agreed to a 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza to begin right about now. The surprising development was announced by the UN and the U.S. earlier this morning.
Said this will last for 72 hours, 3 days. Precious time. It is a lull of opportunity, a moment for the sides, the different factions to be able to come together with the State of Israel in an effort to try to address ways to find a sustainable ceasefire.
Well, once the temporary truce is in place, Secretary Kerry said Egypt will invite all related parties to come to Cairo immediately for serious and focused negotiations. But Israel is expected to continue its strike on the cross-border tunnels being used by Hamas fighters to access and attack Israel from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had promised to annihilate the network of what he called terror tunnels with or without a ceasefire, and that any plan that does not allow Israel to reach this and would not be considered. Meanwhile, a series of underground gas explosions has torn through Taiwan's second largest city, killing 24 people and injuring hundreds of others. Fire officials say it happened around midnight local time in Kaohsiung, adding that firefighters responding to initial reports of a gas leak were among the fatalities. Taiwan's premier said that there were at least 5 powerful blasts, while the director of its disaster agency said the gas was likely propane, which is not extinguishable by water. The explosion shot through the city's sewage system, spawning huge flames and creating giant holes resembling huge caves. Residents told local media that it felt like the area had been hit by a powerful earthquake. Now, on a very different note, on a lighter note, this week and the next are generally considered the peak summer vacation period here in Korea. Often it's when vacationers head off on a big trip overseas, but this year, many are choosing to spend their break at one of Korea's prime holiday spots. And our Shin Se-min brings us this report from one of those very major spots.
The peak summer vacation season is here. From late July and early August every year, more than half of Korea's population takes time away from their daily grind to go on vacation, especially now that school's out.
My 11-year-old daughter is free from school and academies these 2 weeks, which is why we're taking our family vacation now.
Many Koreans tend to go overseas for their holiday, but this year, with the economy stagnant due to the nation's April ferry disaster, vacationers are opting to stay within the country. Among the numerous sites to visit, many are choosing to head to beaches or valleys to beat the heat. Popular destinations like the southeastern port city of Busan are overloaded with people enjoying the sun and surf. Filling almost every inch of the 1.7-kilometer stretch of sand, the nation's largest beach has already welcomed over 1.5 million people this past Sunday alone.
Spending my vacation with my friends in Busan couldn't have been better. We've planned many things during our stay.
As an office worker, it wasn't as easy to take days off for the vacation, but now that I'm here with my girlfriend from Japan, I plan to eat and show her as many attractions in Busan.
And with the week-long Busan Sea Festival kicking off this Friday, including concerts and bikini competitions, the city is sure to attract even more visitors.
It's crowded and can be expensive, but that hasn't stopped the flow of vacationers descending on Busan in the past and won't this year either. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News, Busan.
Well, like our Shin Se-min just reported, high season is upon us, which means hot weather, work holidays, and big business for the local film industry. With many people off work and so few activities available in the humid climate, spectators are rushing to the theaters in record numbers. Here to share with us his view of the current hits and the importance of this season to the film industry is our very own film critic, Conrad. So, hello, Pierce. Last week, the new film of Kundo, The Age of the Rampant, set an opening day record, and now, just a week later, we have a new record set by this week's period blockbuster, which is The Roaring Currents. We weren't expecting this, were we?
I certainly wasn't. I mean, already last week, Kundo set the opening day record at 550,000 admissions, and that was a record that had stood for 3 years since it was set by Transformers 3 in the summer of 2011. And so that happens, and we're looking at that, and it's like, wow, that's a huge number. And then just 7 days later, it happens again, and it didn't just break the record; it totally smashed it. It went 25% over. So it went to 683,000 admissions in one day. So yeah, very, very big numbers we're looking at the moment.
Well, of course, summer is high season for cinema in North America. That is the case, and of course here in Korea as well. But you know, in other parts of the world, like Europe, summer isn't really a high season for their local cinema industry. What is it about this season that that is so profitable for the industry here in Korea?
Well, I'd say it's fairly big in Europe as well, but it's true that in Korea, for just for a few weeks, it's really, really important. As we heard earlier, of course, there's those kind of 2 peak weeks where people go on holidays, so it's a really very important. And if you look back over the history of kind of Korean cinema, the big hits we've seen over the last 10 years, a lot of them are released at this exact time. So films like The Host and Haeundae, even last summer's Snowpiercer. So studios tend to reserve their biggest films of the year for this period. Now, Kundo opened last week, which is just before the holiday started, and still managed huge numbers. But Roaring Currents certainly picked the better weekend. That was really when everyone is finally off. So yeah, huge numbers we're seeing.
So are we seeing, Hollywood, these big Hollywood films, having a rough time in Korea competing with its Korean counterparts?
Well, at the moment, this is definitely a period that is dominated by local films. But at the same time, Hollywood has done really, really well this year in Korea. They've had a stronger market share than Korea has. What happens is the U.S. holiday season, or the summer blockbuster season, starts a lot earlier.
Okay.
So it starts kind of the first weekend of May is when it really kicks off. And
right, because that's when people get off school too, early June.
Yeah, early June is when people get off school, but actually, for some reason, the holiday season, or the summer film season, has gone earlier and earlier. It normally starts mid-May because of the Memorial Day weekend, but for whatever reason, they've kind of stretched it out to fit in more tentpoles. And so by around now, it starts to kind of taper off.
Right.
So we don't have such huge films anymore. And because Korea is such a sophisticated industry, and because piracy is something that U.S. studios are worried about, they tend to release their films at the exact same time, if not earlier in Korea than they do in Hollywood. So by now there's no big, huge films, and they certainly don't want to go up against the massive Korean films of the year. We saw last year there was the film Elysium, which was one of the big August releases. Had it been released the same time where it was everywhere else in the world, it would have gone up against Snowpiercer. But they delayed it a few weeks because they figured it looked pretty similar, and they knew they weren't going to stand a chance against that.
Right. We have a pretty loyal fan base here of Korean films. Now, let's talk about Kundo and the Roaring Current. Now, these two blockbusters, do you see them both continuing its strong posts?
Certainly, Kundo has done really well. It's banked just about 4 million admissions so far in about 9 days, which is huge. But it's taken a huge hit because of Roaring Currents, and it's dipped quite a lot, which is to be expected, I suppose. And it'll still put in some strong numbers, but I dare say it's certainly well over the halfway point of what it will eventually earn. Roaring Currents, however, the reservations at the moment are bigger than I've ever seen by a margin, and it will likely be the first film to ever cross 1 million admissions in a day, which could happen today, but will definitely happen tomorrow and Sunday. And so we'll see records there, and also records for opening weekend, which is also held by Transformers 3. So that'll be smashed. I think we'll see 3 million over the weekend, which will be crazy. And yeah, it might do well, should continue to do well. But there's also the Pirates coming out next week, which should get some business. I don't think it'll be anywhere near as big, but it's certainly a very big season.
Right?
That's exactly it. Right. So 3 period blockbusters in a row. If they all do really well, that'll be a very good thing for the industry, but maybe it won't be a very good thing for people looking for diverse cinema in the future.
Right, right. And, but of course the Roaring Currents, that really, for Koreans, it probably means more to Koreans than to foreign viewers. And of course, it talks about Admiral Lee Sun-shin's a very personal human side of him. But as a film critic, which one do you recommend among these films, including Haemu? I know that's by your favorite director, Bong Joon-ho.
He produced it, right? Yes. Exactly. So I'm totally biased because that's my favorite.
Of course.
But I haven't seen all of them. I've seen 3 of the 4. I haven't seen Pirates yet. But of the 2 currently on release, my favorite was Kundo. It's very fun, tongue-in-cheek, kind of a stylized action film. It's a great director who made Nameless Gangster before. Ha Jung-woo is obviously a great actor. Kang Dong-won is a good foil for him as the villain. There's a really good supporting cast. So I really enjoyed it. I would say it's almost a little too flippant at times, and it's definitely too long. So it certainly has its problems. Roaring Currents, I will admit, I really didn't like it. But
did you not?
I didn't, not at all. But I do think that local audiences will like it a lot more than I did. I felt it was just a little too, shall we say, patriotic, and so it's a little too kind of gung-ho. And the effects are impressive, and I think it will work for a lot of people, and it certainly is already working in Korea very, very well. But for me, and dare I say, other foreign viewers that will see it eventually, I think that the response will not be as strong as it will be here.
Well, we'll all wait for actually Haemu to come out as well as the Pirates, and we'll be the judge of which one is the winner out of the 4 period films.
Teach their own.
All right, Pierce, thank you so much for this week as well, and our viewers will see you next week, Friday.
It's a pleasure as always.
Good afternoon. Well, for the next couple of days, we'll have more than the heat to worry about. Typhoon Nakuri is slowly heading northward, and it will have an impact on the entire nation this weekend. And Nakuri brings with the gusty winds, strong tides, and heavy showers, which are expected to sweep the whole peninsula. So for those of you who are on the summer vacation this weekend, please pay special attention to the future weather updates. But heat still is an issue, and here in Seoul, a heat wave warning has been issued about 2 hours ago, and heat wave alerts are in place in many regions. And the high in Seoul today will rise to 35, while Daegu will climb to 33, and Gwangju and Busan should have a daily highs of 31 and 29 respectively. And for other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 29 and 33, and Dokdo should see a high of 30 this afternoon. And here in Seoul, up to 40 millimeters of a lot of rain is in picture over the weekend, but the path of the typhoon could be changed. Well, that's all for me today, and yes, Sunday it's going to rain a lot, so please keep that in mind. That's all for me today, and back to you, Ganyang, in the studio.
Well, thank you for that, Ji-yeon. And that's just about all from me at this hour. So a heat warning here in Seoul and a heat advisory for the rest of the nation, which means you're advised to stay indoors as much as possible. Stay away from outdoor activity and stay hydrated. Well, I'll check back with you at 4 p.m. Korea time for Business Today.